Welcome to the Hangardeck Podcast. We bring amazing aviation talk and interviews for the aviation enthusiast. You are listening to www.thehangardeck.com with host Pitchlock Pete and the Hangardeck Crew. This show is brought to you by Leading Edge Aviation Consultants. Pre-flight is complete and the crew is strapping in. Stand by for Pitchlock Pete and the Hangardeck team at the Hangardeck Podcast. Welcome to this episode of the Hangardeck Podcast.
All right. Welcome back to the Hangardeck Podcast. I'm your host, Pitchlock Pete. It's January 31st, 2019, and I got producer Steve in this studio. What's up, Steve?
Not much. It's good to be here, and I think we're going to enjoy this topic tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. We're off to a great start this year. This is our second episode 104. Sorry about that. I was already running audio for our commercial break, and we haven't even started yet. So... we're already off to a great start. This is episode 104, and we've got a little bit of diversity going on tonight. So we're steering away from the warbird community for a few episodes, not to miss our upcoming Warbirds Over the Beach down in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I can't wait to get back down there to see the Military Aviation Museum guys. Of course, get to talk to TK at the Fighter Factory. Those guys are always fun to hang out and joke around with. So make sure you mark your calendar. Go on www.thehangardeck.com and go check our calendar for all the events upcoming where you'll see us in 2019. All right. So let's introduce our guest tonight. He's an amazing aviation analyst. He's with the Teal Group Corporation. His name is Richard, and I practice this a number of times so I don't butcher it. And I like the way it rolls off my tongue. Aboulafia, because it sounds Italian to me. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Great to be on. Thank you.
All right, Richard. It's nice that producer Steve is actually reaching out and gaining some really great talent for the show because, we do pay Steve a lot of money to do almost nothing. So, thank you for joining the show, Richard. So,
no, it's really a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you give us a few minutes, your background and a little bit about the Teal Group company?
Yeah, it's funny talking about warbirds, talking about amazing flying stories, talking about really cool planes and cockpits and everything. Yeah, you'll find none of that here. We mostly traffic in PowerPoint and spreadsheets, which makes me a little self-conscious about being on your esteemed program. All we do is track aircraft programs and markets and the fortunes of the industry that builds these planes, both at the top level and at the subcontractor level. So the good part of it, you get to track the technologies, you get to look at the financial health of the companies involved. The bad part of it is I get maybe to visit actual airplanes maybe a couple times a month at most, and it's always the best part of the job. But most of what we do is business-oriented. We've been around for 30-something years, and we track the health and outlook for hundreds of different aerospace programs. All we do is aerospace, stuff that gets off the ground. My focus is on aircraft. We have great people who do missiles, electronic warfare, UAVs, space systems, turbine engines, my one true love back in the day, believe it or not, and pretty much anything else that gets off the ground that involves hardware. So this is a living. People follow our numbers basically to forecast the future. Very often they're subcontractors figuring out how many people to hire or what to tool up for. Very often they're financial institutions that want to figure out where to invest. So those are the people who pay us for our research. And the one really good part of the job, as I said, is to occasionally visit with the people who build and fly airplanes and get to see them in action. So
I'm smiling from ear to ear. I mean, that's you just described my passion, and I know Steve's passion, especially working down here in the Southern Maryland defense market. That's great stuff.
Well, as a matter of fact, our executive director, international, Joel Johnson, really great guy. I just got back from Asia with him on a trip for some clients. And he lives right by Pax River, and he's fond of boating, no surprise. So occasionally he takes us out, and we get some spectacular views from his platform boat.
Yeah, that's great stuff. I want to get right into it with you, Richard, because you just mentioned that you do a lot of this analysis on the defense industry and the commercial aviation aerospace industry, whether it's aircraft or mission systems or missiles, and oh my God, I've got just a list of things that we might cover just a few of them. But can we get right into the Boeing Leonardo MH-139 contract recently? Because that really throws me for a loop. Because let's say for a better part of 20, 30, 40 years, Sikorsky has been the main go-to platform for the United States military. And then all of a sudden, here comes an outsider with a different kind of solution, and not really, it's really throwing us all for a loop.
Well, it means that the Philly boys had it together.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting, I think, to all of us. Everyone is expecting a Blackhawk, Seahawk, whatever win. I believe that they had both, Sierra pitching used and Sikorsky and company pitching new. And it's been a very long time, as you say, since the Navy purchased a transport or special mission platform other than the Blackhawk, Seahawk, and certainly the Air Force, too, most recently combat rescue helicopter being a Blackhawk, and of course the Army, lots of Blackhawks. I think a number of things were in play here. Most importantly, you had a very cost-sensitive contract. Basically, more and more risk and more burden of cost is being shifted to the contractor from DoD. Basically, feel free to lowball. We don't care as long as you assume all risk.
Right.
And they made it very clear, hey, cost-sensitive. So basically, Boeing went to Leonardo and said, we have a lot of money because of our commercial jetliner business. We can afford to take a loss. And you know what? So can you, because the 139 program is just hugely successful. I mean, I would argue it's the most successful civil model of all time, arguably, in terms of numbers over a period of, years. Obviously, maybe the Huey over many decades takes the prize, but I mean, heck, 139, that's been an amazing money winner. So everyone involved could afford to be aggressive. I think that's the key thing. Leonardo had the volume. Boeing had the balance sheet. They went in there and said, hey, Air Force, we're giving you a hell of a good deal on these. And you know what? In terms of operating costs, they're going to be cheaper than a Blackhawk anyway. These are nothing like the motors, nothing like the transmissions, nothing like any of that. And all you're doing half the time is transporting VIPs. And the other half, it's just, not exactly wartime conditions. It's just security teams between missile silos.
Right.
So I think everyone thought, all right, win-win, you get the contract.
Well, it can't, wow, it sounds like it was that easy, but I'm sure they looked at, the MH-139 provisioning and the supply chain management and all of that stuff that really, when you deploy a new weapon system like, say, for instance, Maritime Patrol with the P-8, they had to catch up with some of this sustainment stuff and maintainability of that platform abroad. Do you suspect that might be the same thing with the MH-139 as it's militarized?
Well, probably a little bit of that. I mean, the great sell for the P-8 was the 737 itself. Wherever you fly, no matter what airport, there's a mountain of spare parts. And you don't have to worry whether it's the CFM engines or whether it's the airframe itself. The mission specific, of course, that's different, but the rest of the stuff that's routable, 90% of the time, it's going to be around in a mountain at the local MRO facility. Did that come into factor when looking at the 139? Quite possibly. I mean, this is more of a domestic mission compared to the P-8, which, of course, can be found everywhere from Japan to Europe. And in terms of domestic servicing, it might be a bit easier. But it also, it might have been a factor because the 139 support costs are more in line with commercial reality, whereas, of course, Sikorsky support costs, they're in line with military reality, more expensive.
Right. Well, it's an interesting topic to follow as the MH-139 program starts to mature. I know I'll be following it because in my military time, I haven't seen I've seen the Blackhawk, Seahawk, Jayhawk programs just mature into different variants and different technology upgrades, and you just think this thing is going to keep on going and going and going, you know?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a bit of a pivotal moment here coming for the Blackhawk Seahawk series, because the programs of record, the Seahawks dead, that's wound down. Program of record for the Mike, the UH-60 Mike, that's also coming straight down. And meanwhile, Bell's being very aggressive with the V-280 for the future vertical lift requirement, making it very clear that, yes, this costs more, but it gives you a lot more capability. And no one really knows what the next step is. Is the Army going to do an N model of the UH-60 or an O or a P or whatever? Or are they going to make a shift to JMR FVL or something else altogether? So after many decades, you can't see the end in sight for the Blackhawk yet, but on the other hand, it's the days of a guaranteed 10 or 12 per month coming out of Stratford, that might be winding down.
Wow. Great stuff, Richard. Let's jump right in, since we're talking rotary wing airplanes. The Navy THXS training helicopter. What are your thoughts, and tell us a little bit about what's going on in your head?
Yeah, it's a nice requirement. I mean, if you're building light helicopters, singles or even light twins, you got to look at this and say, man, 130, nice. And of course, lots of sustainment costs, because we're talking Navy here. And you've got what's pretty clearly a three-way split between Airbus, Bell, who's the incumbent, but with a different model, and of course, Augusta-Westland. And this time, Augusta-Westland and Airbus, to the best of my knowledge, aren't working through U.S. Front offices. They're working through their own office. In other words, they don't have Boeing to go through the way they did with the 139. This is going to be really interesting to watch. Does anyone have a particular advantage here? I don't see it. I think Airbus might be at a bit of a disadvantage. They've got the more expensive option if they pitch the 135 relative to the 119 and the 407 from Bell. So it's going to be interesting to watch.
Thank you. Wow. Yeah, I'm dialed into it. I like. We're coming up to a time in acquisition here that you have a lot of legacy airplanes in the military. And, the sustainment of these legacy airplanes is like one of the top priorities. It's either we got to sustain these things throughout 2035, 2040, 2045, or we're looking at, replacement. So, one of those is the venerable B-52 bomber. I mean, that's still flying, right?
Oh, boy. And I guess, you could see a scenario where somebody's great-grandchildren fly it, having flown it themselves in the 50s, and great-great-great-grandchildren. I mean, this is a 2050 story, quite possibly. But what you're talking about is dead on. And the problem is that no one's ever been able to reconcile the budget reality. You got the O&M budget, and you got the procurement budget. If you did this with your family, you'd say, hey, look, if we get rid of that old clunker and replace it with a new car, we save X per year and put that into the lease payments, and we come out ahead. You can't do that in the military. Just because you save money in O&M because of that sustainment dynamic doesn't mean you can transition that cash into the procurement accounts, which, of course, this dynamic definitely helps keep antiques in service a lot longer than sounds reasonable.
Yeah, very good point. Steve's chomping at the bit to get on the microphone here.
So with what we're just talking about here, you saw the Boeing. They won the PA program because they had the commercial version. Now they just won the MH-139. Is that the way we're going? Is more aircrafts going to be built off of the commercial version because the supply chain's there, and like you said, you go into any airport and the parts are readily available. So, I mean, really, where is the industry going? Are we going to have a lot more merger between the commercial side and the military side to try to get that supply chain more widespread and easily accessible to everybody out there?
Yeah, great question. I mean, look, you've got Boeing with a very big advantage. They're the only defense prime, big defense prime, with a big commercial side. Everyone else banged out of it years ago. Lockheed Martin, most recently, with its federal IT business. They're the only ones with this advantage. And it's not just the ability to pitch commercial derivatives. It's also the massive cash stream you've got from the commercial jetliner business that allows you to put a very aggressive bid in for defense contracts. And this is something the Pentagon loves. You know, it's like, oh, great, so you're going to help pay for this. Super, we love it. Now, I think you got to differentiate between cost-driven defense contracts, which are, more and more commercial derivatives, absolutely, and very often very cost-driven as contracts. Please take a loss up front. We like it when you do that. And then you've got the performance stuff. And the performance stuff is more wide open. And, of course, most recently, you had the bomber, LRSB, won by Northrop Grumman, the B-21. That there's no amount of, it was somewhat cost-driven, but at the end of the day, a lot of it was about performance and risk. So, in other words, there's stuff that Boeing and the people with civil derivatives can go after, and then there's stuff that's really more about performance and risk. And the next big thing going to happen, I don't know, say 8-10 years, is going to be sixth-generation fighters, which might be generation 5.5, whatever you like to call it, whether it's NGAD from the Air Force or PCA. I'm sorry, NGAD is, I was confused, FAXX from Navy and NGAD stroke PCA from Air Force. But whatever it is, it's not going to be a commercial derivative, of course, and the commercial product line's not going to have anything to do with it. So there's sort of going to be this bifurcation between stuff that, as you say, is going to heavily favor companies like Boeing that have a commercial line, and then there's the other side that might favor the more traditional defense primes.
Yeah. Well, we're talking to Richard Aboulafia, and we're going to be right back after this this message and continue our discussion with Richard. We'll be right back at the Hangar Deck.
Aviators Hotline has been bringing buyers and sellers together for 39 years. The aviation community has come to rely on them to assist in the buying and selling of single, twin, and turboprop aircraft, as well as parts and services. Published monthly in print and digital format, Aviators Hotline is positioned to be your true marketing solution with multimedia options. Visit aviatorshotline.com or aircraftforsale.com for more information.
Hey, welcome back to the Hangar Deck. We're having a great conversation with the vice president of the Teal Group of the analysis team there, Richard Aboulafia, and talking about sixth-generation fighters. You know, I just was hanging on every word you said, Richard, about sixth generation, because I can't get my mind off of fifth generation right now and how long the F-35 has been in development, and now finally out of iOS or IOC into full operational capability. Is it going to be a manned solution? Is it going to be an unmanned solution? The sixth generation, because you mentioned a whole bunch of terms that, man, I got to dig in and start researching.
Well, nobody really knows a whole lot about it. A lot of it is just concept drawings. I think the thinking is that we've got at least another generation of, manned crewed fighters, but possibly with optionally manned features, for certain missions. That kind of connectivity, I think, is almost certainly going to be baked into any kind of next generation design.
Yeah. It's very fascinating to watch it down here in Southern Maryland and pay attention to all these new articles on this new designs and all this new stuff coming out. Right, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I had the fortunate opportunity up in Pennsylvania. I was there over Thanksgiving, and I went to AHS dinner up there, and they were talking about the NATO helicopter, the future studies there, and all the helicopters, medium, light, and heavy, are all coming to date where they're going to be retired, and it's what's going to be next. And there was this big group that NATO put together to try to figure out what's it going to be. And can you talk about that a little bit? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, the last time this happened was in the 80s, and oh boy, happy stories. I was in grad school in Britain back in the 80s, and what became NFH, the NATO frigate helicopter, and then NH-90, NATO helicopter for the 90s, was evolved in that time as a kind of Super Black Hawk, but also a Seahawk, that's the NFH-90. The TTH-90 is the transport. And it took them an awful lot of time, and it took them awful lot of effort to basically harmonize all of the divergent requirements, both in terms of shipborne, non-shipborne, combat search and rescue, transport, everything that you need in a machine in that class, to say nothing of the various national requirements from the countries that were behind it, which was most of them, as well as an eye on the export market. Eventually, they got it done. The result is, they've built about 500 or 600 NH-90s, I think, so far, somewhere in that zone, and more coming. And they got to think decades in advance about what happens next, because that's, it takes so long to harmonize everything. But now you've got the added complication. Do you need to think about a new kind of helicopter? I mean, to think about it, NH-90, Black Hawk, MH-139, everything we're talking about, it's a helicopter that, you'd see it from the vantage of, say, 1955, and you'd think, wow, wait a minute, 60 years later, and that's it? It still looks an awful lot like what we've got on the drawing board today. So the question becomes, do you really want to break with that architecture? And that's what I think the U.S., of course, is trying to work through with JMR FVL. Do you want to do a compound rotor? Do you want to do an advanced next-generation tilt rotor like the V280? And no one can see an end in sight in this, but on the other hand, they've set their minds to doing something more than a traditional 150-knot conventional layout machine. And there's no shortage of experimentation in Europe with Airbus's X3 program, or the Erica, or for that matter, the Leonardo 609 that they purchased their share of from Bell. Is something new going to happen? So suffice to say that NATO needs to start thinking now. It's going to take decades to play out, but it's going to be fascinating to watch.
Oh, wow. I can't wait, because in the news, we're talking about advanced rotorcraft and advanced technologies and changing the paradigm over in Europe, internationally with NATO. But recently, there's a lot of articles in defense news about, our allies and European operators of the S-61 finally retiring that aircraft after how many years now, Richard? That I think the first flight was 1958 with the Venerable Sea King.
Well, my family and I live in the flight path for the current Marine One, so we still see an occasional VH3 derivative of that. So yeah, it's amazing how long these things last, both as programs and as machines. But it's a very long game, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. It's just been a pleasure talking with you. Is there something that you'd like to tell our audience about the Teal Group Corporation before we wrap up our interview with you, Richard?
Well, I'd point out, I was at a presentation yesterday, National Aeronautic Association, and I gave my little overview, but more importantly, a great writer and aviator, Bill Garvey, got an award. And Bill, a terrific gentleman, got up and he made the point that I'd like to make, which is very simply, it's not much that we really love the machines, it's really the people. And I thought what he had to say was inspiring. I think of all the industries on the planet, and I think of all the people I've met doing whatever I do. The best people in the world are aviation people, and I really love that aspect of it. Anyway, I think at Teal Group, we're hobbyists in addition to I think all of us would be building model kits if we weren't paid to collect numbers. But when I think about it, it's really the opportunity to meet the fantastic people in aviation out there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. That's why we do what we do at the Hangardeck. We're going on 5 years now collecting stories and talking to either veterans, professionals like yourself, pilots, maintainers. It's such a joy to be on the other side of this microphone and listen to these stories that people tell. And I'm just going to keep doing it until I can't do it anymore. But I completely understand. Now, what you guys don't know about the interview that you're listening to now is that we had a pre-interview with Richard, and we exchange and get to know each other. And I told him that I was a flight engineer in the Navy and on a P-3 Orion, and he's got a real passion for maritime aviation, don't you, Richard?
Yeah, it's fascinating because at the end of the day, that's where the strategy is, isn't it? The control of the world seas. And the most interesting part of military history, no disrespect to aviation, but it's the 19th century, it's the 18th century, it's that naval history. Now you realize, hey, it's really about, in the 20th century, there was this revolution where it became about air power at sea as being one of the most important factors in the control of, your strategic position as a country, and especially for a maritime power like the U.S. So that intersection of geopolitics and technology and people, there again, you really see it with maritime patrol.
Yeah, you do, and I daily pay attention to defense industry news and some of these other sites that I follow. It's interesting to see how the Pacific is going to fold out, because that it's a venerable. It's not like the 1940s and 30s where it wasn't very. It was a very big ocean. Now it seems like it's not a very big ocean. If you can understand that analogy.
No, that's exactly right. It seems all too close, and the divergent interests, I'm afraid, between China and a lot of the other countries there, some of whom are our allies, just seems quite stark. And I hope the politicians and everyone involved can let's just say keep things on an even keel, because the potential for misunderstanding is rife over there.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Richard, for coming on the show. You can read about the Teal Group at www.tealgroup.com. It is now one of my favorite websites to go look to, because up until now I wasn't tracking you guys, and I read some of your articles, Richard, about the Airbus thing, and I'm fascinated. So maybe next time we can have you back on the show and talk about fixed wing commercial Airbus, because that's a great topic. We do have a pilot associated with us that flies the product line, and he just loves it.
Oh, I'd be delighted. I'd also add, if I may, all of my writings and whatever else, the full compendium, and it's all free, is at www.richardaboulafia.com. That's where you see the complete mother lode, if you will, and anything I think about aircraft markets and programs, I put down there.
Wonderful. I'm going to put a link on that up on our website and, of course, our Facebook page. So you can hear this interview and many more at www.thehangardeck.com, Stitcher Radio, Apple, iTunes, Google Play, and so on and so forth. But my closing thoughts, we'll go to Steve first. Go ahead, Steve.
It's just nice to talk about rotorcraft. I mean, Philadelphia is the hub for it. I mean, you got a great start there. Companies are there. Probably have 4 to 5 of the major players right there in the Philadelphia area.
He's going to keep pitching Philly, Richard. He's from Philly, and
excellent.
When the Eagles were in the playoffs, it was you couldn't even talk to him. So
that wasn't that bad.
but sir, if you have any other closing thoughts,
just thank you for coming on. It was a great discussion, and I look forward to our next one.
Absolutely. So for me, Richard, it's been a pleasure meeting you and talking briefly with you at the Hangar Deck. You're very much welcome on the show anytime. It's we bring back our guests a lot of times, and check up on them in the last couple of years, and it's just a joy to see what they're working on next. So it's good stuff.
Well, I can't wait to listen to your next program, and I really am honored to be on. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. So, for the Hangar Deck, Look for us at Warbirds Over the Beach coming up in May. We're going to be there live on checking out the BF 109 G4 Messerschmitt. And what else do they have? They have all kinds of, they got the P-63, I believe, coming up from the Commemorative Air Force, the Dixie Wing, and a whole bunch of other great World War II airplanes that they're putting a heavy iron up this year. So go check it out. Warbirds Over the Beach. Hangar Deck. That's it. Out.